Doesn't fall as far.
It's taped down pretty good.
Yeah.
We have different environments today. We might go more than 2 weeks in a row.
Try my best.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. As many remember, last year Vermonters saw a historic property tax increase with a high of 38% and an average increase of around 14%, which was significant considering inflation in many other areas. I think most Vermonters agreed the system was broken and wasn't sustainable. So to avoid facing yet another spike, we communicated with school boards throughout the fall and asked them to be disciplined with their budgets to avoid a repeat of last year. And it appears most school boards did just that. And I want to thank them for their hard work because I know many had to make some difficult and tough decisions, which is never easy. But even with a majority of school budgets passing, which is good news, we can't declare victory. We have to stay focused and follow through on making our education system more affordable and sustainable while producing greater opportunities for our kids. In the budget I presented to the legislature in January, I proposed to use $77 million to buy down property tax rates so communities aren't faced with another tax increase, which was projected to be 6% if we do nothing. Now, I know many critics will say using one-time money to buy down rates is fiscally irresponsible and short-sighted without the broader transformation that we must make, because we'll be faced with the same property tax problem next year with an even larger increase. As I said, many school boards have done their part to keep spending from growing more than we can afford. And my team has presented a plan to make structural changes to improve outcomes for our students and make property taxes more predictable and create more equitable opportunities for students. We also need the legislature to do their part and address education transformation this session because we can't afford to wait. As you might remember, at the end of last session, the legislature passed 70 bills in 3 days. So I'm confident if they stay focused, we can accomplish what I believe needs to be done this session. So with that, I'll turn it over to Secretary Saunders.
Thank you, Governor Scott. I'm pleased to provide an update on Governor Scott's education transformation proposal and to clarify key aspects of the plan. As of last week, the administration presented over 190 pages of legislative language to the General Assembly. As Governor Scott indicated, he has created a call to pass legislation this session to strengthen our public schools and put us on a path to sustainability. The governor has also committed through his budget request to provide immediate tax relief to allow the space and time needed this session to dig into the details for transformational change. I'm going to cover a lot today because the work we are undertaking is complex and we need to spend time understanding the whole. First, I will walk through how we got here. The proposal is a result of a comprehensive look at data and feedback from over 1,000 Vermonters through the Agency of Education's Listen and Learn tour and was informed by the work of the General Assembly over the past decade to improve equity and opportunity. Second, I will describe how the governor's plan focuses on quality. Students and quality are the heart of this proposal. So far, a lot of the public discourse has been about funding and governance. But funding and governance are only vehicles to support quality. As we move forward, we must focus on students and center quality in our discussions. Third, I will address some of the common misconceptions about this plan. I know this work is big and it's a lot to digest, but it is important that we ground our discussion in facts. We appreciate the opportunity to work with legislators and committees in having these conversations. There's more work to do, and we are ready and willing to roll up our sleeves and refine the proposal. Let's start by reviewing how we got to this point in time. While we may not always agree on everything, it is important that we start from a place of shared understanding. Over the course of the fall, the agency staff heard from Vermonters from across the state through the Listen and Learn tour. I would encourage members of the public to review key themes from the agency's Listen and Learn tour, which are published on our website. The themes are rooted in Vermont's value of equity and the goal of striking the right balance between unity and freedom. I will share a few quotes that illustrate the primary takeaways from the Listen and Learn tour. Reflecting on existing inequities, a resident from Bennington said, quote, "Opportunities should be awarded and offered to all students regardless of socioeconomic status or abilities," end quote. To address the disparity in opportunities, particularly in rural communities, Vermonters discussed the importance of achieving scale. A resident of Woodstock noted that we might need to consider, quote, "consolidation to ensure access to opportunities," end quote. A resident from Burlington shared a similar thought, saying, quote, "We need more regionalized decision-making to break out of hyperlocal systems that are not working," end quote. We heard that our teachers are being asked to do more, specifically because of the increasing mental health needs of our students. A resident of Stowe indicated that, quote, "more mental health supports are needed to reduce strain on teachers," end quote. Similarly, an educator from Rutland identified a central challenge in meeting the needs, asking, quote, "How do we meet these increasing needs, especially in rural areas where we have less access to community resources," end quote. We also heard a call for more community and parental engagement, with a Brattleboro educator describing that, quote, "parents and families are disconnected from their role in student success," end quote. We received multiple requests for more state leadership and greater support from the Agency of Education. A Lyndonville educator said, quote, "AOE should tighten expectations and offer limited choices through vetted assessments and curriculums," end quote. We must acknowledge that achieving a balance between unity and freedom is an enduring challenge and one that we will need to continue to grapple with. This plan approaches that tension from the perspective of what is best for students and teachers. Lastly, we recognize that schools do not exist in a vacuum and that issues of affordability, housing, and healthcare all contribute to the challenges schools are navigating. One resident from Northwest Vermont said it best, quote, "Education funding has become a backstop for all funding needs in Vermont. The system is fundamentally flawed," end quote. While the funding system may be flawed, educators are working hard to meet the needs of their students, and we must address those needs holistically to help our students thrive in school and after graduation. Over the past year, we have also analyzed our spending and performance data thoroughly. We continue to see gaps in performance for our most vulnerable students, despite our increased investment. These data reinforce that we are not achieving the equity that we desire in our public education system. Our highest needs communities tend to spend less per pupil, even though the needs are greater. I am relieved that most school budgets passed yesterday, because the prospect of cutting more and more over the next several months flies in the face of our goal for a well-rounded education. We know that education leaders had to make difficult decisions to get to yes with their communities. We must acknowledge and address the barriers within our current system that have real impacts on students. There's also an additional urgency to act, given the uncertainties around federal funding and state economic pressures, in order to future-proof our system. In doing this work, we must continue to focus on education quality. What do we mean by quality? We mean that every student has access to the same educational opportunities, that our schools are preparing students to be successful in whatever path they choose after graduation, that parents and students understand what is expected of their students, and that schools and teachers are supported to help students achieve at high levels of excellence. We should want and expect that our significant investment in our education system results in world-class opportunities for our students, one that drives community revitalization and affirms our values. The proposal we have put forth is not just about dollars and district size. It is about rethinking how we deliver education to improve quality for all students. Faced with the challenges of declining enrollment and increasing costs, some states might have chosen to approach the issue as a pure math problem, determine the available revenue that the state is willing to set aside for education, and then divide that number by the number of students. That is not the approach that Governor Scott took. The governor challenged his team, all of us, to focus on quality and sustainability. Starting from a place of collaboration, the administration built upon the study that the General Assembly commissioned to look at how we could change our funding system. We used that study from a nationally recognized expert and made adjustments that took into account the Vermont context of small rural schools. We also added funds that would resource critical priorities to expand student opportunities and achieve more equity in teacher pay. Our approach also factored in the recommendations of prior legislative committees. This approach was intended to build upon expressed priorities to make it possible for the General Assembly to take concrete action this session. We focused on the vision and identified our goals and intended outcomes when developing this plan. It was all about high-quality learning experiences for our students and support for all teachers. The plan seeks to expand opportunities for students and give our teachers the support and pay they need to do what they do best, light a spark for learning and shape the next generation. The plan prioritizes the following quality measures: improve access to high-quality preschool, expand access to career exploration starting in middle school, provide after-school enrichment and tutoring, ensure a wide range of offerings in the arts, give teachers access to more specialized resources, and support through resource sharing and connection with a broader community of peers. Pay teachers a competitive wage. Make it easier to access high-quality instructional materials with statewide resources to ensure teachers aren't duplicating the same efforts as their neighbors. Protect teacher planning time to allow for increased personalization and customization of lessons, and shift from a focus on compliance to a focus on educational quality. We know that to make transformational change, schools and communities will need significant support. We heard a clear call from our partners in the field that they are looking to the Agency of Education to provide clear direction and support to achieve our shared goals for students. The governor's budget proposal includes funding to increase the agency's capacity to support educational quality by providing more on-the-ground support. Over the next year, the agency will leverage this funding to strengthen our systems of accountability and improve our supports for educators and school leaders around literacy and math. We will target support to districts to provide practical planning around budgeting and staffing to prepare our system for new approaches to funding and governance. We will continue to improve quality data collection and analysis. We will also make investments to support professional development for educators and for incoming school boards under the new district construct. This is not a one-year effort, and we plan to provide ongoing and expanded support throughout the transition period and beyond. As Secretary, my goal is to strengthen the agency to respond to the needs and priorities of our schools and to ensure that we have strong connections between quality and accountability across our entire system. In order to achieve this level of quality, we need to think about scale. The recommendation to move toward larger regional districts is about quality. For years, conversations at the State House have centered on how to support our schools, particularly in rural areas, and how to ensure access to specialized resources and support given our workforce challenges. The regional districts allow funding to create more robust central office supports, giving principals and teachers access to more resources and ensuring students' needs are met. Currently, some districts are not able to offer the specialized educational services for students, and in our current system, sharing staff resources is very challenging, and the costs continue to increase. We recognize that this is a shift and acknowledge that other district configurations are being contemplated by the General Assembly. We welcome those discussions and are committed to evaluating the pros and cons of different district models. In doing this, we urge our partners to keep student opportunities and outcomes at the center of the conversation when considering how we might restructure our system. We are eager to work with others to improve and refine the proposal on the table, but we need to keep the conversations going and get practical and concrete. Now I'd like to transition to addressing some of the misconceptions and questions. Regarding the funding, there seems to be a concern about the base funding formula and whether or not it is sufficient. To that, I say we need to understand where the perceived gaps are and discuss them. In that conversation, it is important to note that the base funding proposed is one of the highest base funding amounts in the country, coupled with the highest weights when compared to other states. This plan still will make Vermont a top spender in education, but the goal is to be smarter and more strategic with our investments to support students and teachers. There are a lot of questions about school consolidation. To be clear, this proposal does not direct school closures. That work should and must be done in coordination with the local community and understanding of student needs. In fact, the modeling assumes that we will largely maintain our existing school portfolio in the first years of the foundation formula. What the plan does establish is a criteria that is fair and consistent across the state. It factors a variety of considerations, including financial viability, school quality, commute times, and facility conditions. There are a lot of concerns that we've heard about students being on a bus for 2 hours. The administration shares that concern, which is why we suggest looking at commute times when local communities make decisions around school consolidation. At the end of the day, any conversation around school consolidation should focus on students, and we need to ask ourselves, what would the students gain? Another area of significant concern has been about how the proposal handles school choice. I want to be clear that the claims that this proposal erodes the public education system or increases privatization are completely unfounded. This proposal does not expand choice, but rather manages it in a way that strengthens public schools and promotes equity. The plan eliminates non-operating districts, eliminates Vermont's practice of sending tuition out of state, reduces the number of public dollars flowing to independent schools, and establishes shared accountability. I encourage Vermonters to read the bill as introduced. The language is clear and consistent with Vermonters' goals of shared accountability and equitable access statewide. Lastly, there are a lot of questions about the timeline. We admit that this work is big and will take years to implement fully, but we need to start. Our plan outlines a 4-year timeline and phases in certain measures over a 2-year period to prepare the system for a funding shift. The General Assembly now has in front of them a comprehensive proposal for education transformation. We know that there is still a great deal of work to be done to refine and improve this proposal. We welcome and need collaboration and partnership to ensure that we produce the best result for Vermont students and communities. We need everyone to come to the table with their concrete and specific ideas and to be open to compromise. As the governor has said, there is something in this proposal for everyone to like and everyone to hate. Most of all, we need to begin the real work of how this proposal could be implemented. We need to be practical and focused on problem solving. And most importantly, we need to keep students at the very heart of the conversations that we have, because that is truly a Vermont value that we all share. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to provide an update.
Now open it up to questions.
You mentioned some other potential ideas. I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts on the Seth Bongard's proposal, the map that would have 7 school districts to supervisory unions, if you guys got to check that out at all last week when that came out of Senate Education.
Again, I'm going to let Zoe answer the question more thoroughly, but I had answered the question before about the number of districts. We had 5. There was talk about expanding that, and I said that that wasn't a deal breaker. So we're open to suggestions on how we can do it better, but it was a starting point for the discussion.
Absolutely. I don't have much further to add to that other than we're open to looking at other district configurations and appreciate the committee and others bringing together ideas on the table. We will review those and provide recommendations around what we see as a pro and a con of different configurations. But I think the point is that we all need to work collectively towards this in making sure that we land on a district size and configuration that will work for Vermont and achieves our goals, and just continue to keep students at the forefront and thinking about how different district configurations will support students and also give our teachers the resources that they need to support their work.
And you mentioned earlier, Governor, as well, the $77 million this year to help buy down property taxes, but the rolling back universal school meal seems like a non-starter for a lot of Democrats. Have you guys looked or thought about any other potential ways to, say, find that $17–18 million that school meals universally would cost? Maybe finding other avenues that you could cut, remove to maybe fill that gap if Democrats aren't willing to put that in their budget.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to clarify, some have been confused. We are not advocating to do away with the program for school meals. We want kids who can't afford food, the families who are struggling, to have access to that like we did the year before last. Having said that, you know, I can read the room. It seems as though they're fairly dug in on that. So I look forward to their proposals to come up with $17 million worth of cuts in some other area. I'm not advocating and will not raise any taxes to fill that gap. So at this point, it's on them to come back with a suggestion as to what they would cut to provide for that $17 million.
So given the recent back and forth between President Trump and Governor Mills over in Maine when it comes to transgender athletes in sports and Vermont's similar policy, has there been any conversation about changing Vermont's policy to be more in line with what the federal government says? If so, why or why not?
You know, I've answered this question before as well, and I believe that we should let kids be kids at a certain age. It doesn't matter where they're at. I remember during elementary school, for instance, there were many females who were much better athletes than males, myself included. They always got picked for the kickball team first. So let's let kids be kids and enjoy sports for what it is. When it gets to be at a higher level in maybe high school and college and so forth, that remains to be determined. But there should be some sort of mechanism to make sure that there's a fair playing field in that regard. So I've said that previously. I believe that to be the case. Olympics, I think, has some sort of a standard, but I think there needs to be a standard somewhere when it becomes more professionalized.
What did you think about the back and forth between Trump and Mills in that meeting? That must have been uncomfortable.
Yeah, it was. I thought it was inappropriate for the meeting. We'd had a fairly good discussion earlier with some of the cabinet members and so forth, and yeah, it was a little bit awkward in the room, and I just didn't think it was necessary.
What would you have said if Trump called out Vermont, said that he was going to take Vermont's federal funding away because of Vermont's position on trans athletes?
Yeah, well, again, I don't know if I would have answered the exact same way that Governor Mills did. Governor Mills is a former Attorney General, so she went directly to see in court. So I might have had a different response, but again, we'll respect Vermont's wishes, and you know, states were here before the federal government in some respects. The states formed the federal government, so I believe in somewhat the local control aspect, and we'll decide that on our own here in Vermont.
Have you had any communication with the federal government about Vermont's policy?
Have
Because Maine has
not.
had
Yeah.
communication that their policy is out of line with federal.
Yeah, I have not. I don't know where we stand in that regard, to be honest with you.
Thank you.
So when it comes to tariffs with our neighbors to the north, what is the state's current position on that? Do you have any better understanding on the impacts to Vermonters, specifically when it comes to energy?
Yeah, it's been difficult to keep up in some respect, and that's been my argument all along, that we cannot chase every single issue that comes our way over the next 4 years, because it seems to change on a daily basis. I think it just changed in the last few hours as well. So I'm concerned. Tariffs is a tool that can be used, tool in the toolbox, so to speak. but it's how you use that tool that's important. We had the USMCA that was President Trump had a seat at the table and actually forwarded, I thought, a good proposal that included Canada and Mexico and the U.S. That was 4 or 5 years ago, and I think if they want to change that agreement, because tariffs were included in the agreement. If they want to change the agreement, they should open that back up and get at the negotiating table and do it in a measured way. I think the way this is a blunt force type of approach, it just doesn't fit. I can think of other countries that we might want to have that blunt force utilized, but not Canada in particular. They're our largest trading partner. They are our friends, and we shouldn't treat friends this way.
We've been hearing from some members of the business community who are wondering, like, is the state going to do anything concrete to help ease the pain of the tariffs? Is there anything being done now, or that's in the works to help with that?
Yeah, well, again, it's a little difficult to keep up to see what effects they would have on us. Now, we know in agriculture, for instance, we receive a lot of grain, fertilizer, and so forth. That would have a direct impact on us. We don't know what the retaliation is going to be either, so it's difficult for us to measure that. Even in terms of energy, and I might have Secretary Curley come up and talk more about this, because as you know, we put together a group to kind of monitor the situation. And even in terms of we get a lot of electricity from Hydro-Quebec, but I'm not sure that falls under the tariffs. And we're trying to, I've heard that it may not fall under that. But certainly natural gas does, and certainly diesel, home heating fuel, and so forth do. So that would have a direct impact on everyday Vermonters and businesses. So I might have you, and maybe I can fill in the gaps after that.
Certainly our early findings have shown that, tariffs would drive up costs. Just, for those who aren't aware, a tariff is a federal tax, right? So I would ask if you could be a little more clear when you say people are asking what we might do specifically. Are you suggesting that folks are wondering if we're going to absorb some cost in some way as a government? Like, have you heard? I'm just curious what you're hearing back, so I can be a little more specific in responding.
I think that they are referring to whether there will be any form of material support, but also just like kind of any kind of systemic way of helping to push back against the tariffs or ease the pain, even if indirectly through some other means. I think that a lot of the business community, like you're talking about, are still trying to figure out how
Right.
it will affect them, so it's hard
Right.
for them to know what they would be asking for.
Right, exactly. So to the governor's point, this is very fluid. In fact, I'll share with you that just within the last hour, maybe, President Trump has delayed the tariffs on Mexico. I don't know, some of you may have already known that, but the U.S. Commerce Secretary Lutnick has mentioned that the president is likely to also announce that there would be a delay on Canada as well. So again, just to tell you how fluid this all is, and we're trying to not have a knee-jerk reaction here, but what our tariff team is doing, as the governor mentioned, is we're trying to understand the impacts. And so we're not suggesting that the government try to absorb it right now. What we're trying to really understand is to give Vermonters some predictability in what they can expect. And so if you take energy, for example, there are different points in time where that could impact Vermonters. So some things would be pretty immediate. For example, if fuel oil is pulled out of Canada or gasoline, that would be a pretty immediate impact. But something like electricity or natural gas, those impacts might be a little slower to come through because it's very technical, but it goes through the Public Utility Commission. It's just a longer runway for when it impacts Vermonters. So some businesses right now, pretty much all businesses that import are communicating with their customers to try to help them understand what they can expect. And different businesses, we don't pull all those levers, right? So different businesses are managing it a little different. Some are saying in the short term, we're going to try to absorb it. Some are saying we can't possibly do that. Some it's a little bit of a mix. And so really what we're trying to do right now is just really understand all of it. And, ultimately, if there are recommendations that we could make to try to help, we would do that. But it's very early, as the governor mentioned. But it would be very difficult long term, certainly, to do something like what we saw in COVID or after some of the flooding, where we're literally trying to absorb that because it is a tax. It's an ongoing thing. So, but yeah, we're working on that. As I mentioned, businesses that do import are on top of this. They're working through it as well, and we're amazed. As you might imagine, they want to try to defray these costs or find other sources where they can keep the costs down and keep their customers from feeling that increase.
I might, while we're on the subject, maybe Secretary Tebbetts, do you have anything to add, or Commissioner Johnson?
Sure, Governor. Hi, Anson Tebbetts from the Agency of Agriculture. Yeah, I mean, the farmers and our producers are right in the middle of this, from energy to feed to fertilizer. We're in the middle of maple season now, so a lot of discussion about how maple will be impacted. And I might share just an anecdote for folks, or a real example. Was a public post from Morrison's feed up in the kingdom in St. Johnsbury. I'm just going to read a little bit for you because it gives you a real sense that this is real money and this real impact if these things go forward. And it begins. Earl went up to get some feed up in. He's the owner of Morrison Feeds. Went up to Canada. Trump's tariffs went into effect at 12 a.m. today. This was a day ago. A load of soy meal will add $5,000 in tariffs, while a load of corn will add $2,200 in tariffs. This equates to roughly $10,000 per day increase in the cost of Morrison's. While this indeed is a financial hit, we are hopeful that this move by the federal government will result in positive outcomes in some shape or form. We're also hopeful that this will be short term, so our plan at the moment is to absorb the increased cost in order to mitigate the effect on our customers. So that's a small company in Vermont that's taken a pretty significant financial hit, but they're going to absorb it now and not going to pass it along to their customers at this time. That's just one example of that's out there that all our farmers are concerned about. And of course, we all want predictability, and this is the challenging part about this whole is there's really no predictability in this because again, as Secretary Curley just mentioned, we have another change related to Mexico and maybe Canada is next. So that's kind of the perspective from the ag community right now.
Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you, Governor. As Secretary Curley mentioned, I think at least the way myself and my team have been thinking about this, broadly speaking, in terms of energy, I think Vermonters will, both in terms of impact and timing, it will start with gases, right? You'll first see it at the gasoline pump. The next thing you might see a rate in tariff-driven increases, if in fact they go forward, will be with heating oil and for Vermonters heating their homes. And then lastly will be electricity. And I think as Secretary Curley alluded to, there is a fundamental question as to the applicability of tariffs to one of the largest sources of electricity Vermonters have, which namely the Hydro-Quebec contract. Basically, it's because it's called an internal...
I hate that when that happens.
subsidiary of Hydro-Quebec. Sorry, did I...
Yeah, you started with... go back to where you said when you started in, whatever that was.
Okay, internal bilateral transaction. So one, in terms of tariffs and applicability to electricity, traditionally, say over the last 60, 70 years, tariffs haven't applied. second kind of line of defense is the nature of this contract and who's part of it. Hydro-Quebec US, a US-based subsidiary, and the Vermont utilities. But that's called an internal bilateral transaction. I know that quickly gets Byzantine, but these are the kinds of things that matter and why the governor and Secretary Curley were talking about the specifics of the tariff matter. Exactly what's being implemented, the guidance that comes out matters. Right now, ISO New England Independent System Operator, the folks who run the regional grid. New York ISO, those folks who run New York's grid. The Vermont utilities, and importantly, the Hydro-Quebec officials all have a similar interpretation with regards to these kind of defenses to Vermonters having to pay these rate increases. If in fact they happen though, I do want to put this in perspective. I thought Secretary Tippett did a great job of offering some perspective to that anecdote. What I would offer is there was very little publicity around a much higher expense, namely the Constellation generating plant, which all New England ratepayers were paying for about 3 years, on the order of billions a year. And for instance, for Green Mountain Power's share of paying for this generating plant as a reliability insurance policy during long spells of cold, that was roughly $13 million a year. What we're talking about now for those same people, if in fact the 10% tariff happens, that's about $7 million a year. So there are strategies we can employ, and with Secretary Curley and Secretary Tippett and the rest of the team and with the governor, we're identifying those strategies. I would say lastly, Governor, that one of the things we're very aware of now, though, is don't add to the uncertainty and to the pain on energy costs. And I think that's something that this department will be even more focused on ensuring, especially given this uncertainty, then let's be more mindful of affordability questions and challenges to Vermonters. With that, I'll stop, Governor.
Thank you. Yes.
Governor, the premiers of Ontario and Quebec have both said that cutting off electricity to the U.S., including, I suppose, possibly Vermont's power contract from HQ, is on the table. That's not a tariff thing, that's just oh yeah, going to cut you off. Is this something that you're aware of, and has Carrick possibly spoken with his counterparts up there about that?
Well, again, welcome to the trade war, and with our friends to the north. They're holding a pretty good set of cards in terms of Vermont. I think 30% of our electricity comes from Hydro-Quebec, so that's, again, significant. I think regardless, and again, when I was in Washington, I spoke with Premier Ford. We met. It was a great discussion that we had. He reassured again, as he has been doing. He did it last night. I think it was on CNN. Reassuring Americans that we're still friends, but they're there to support Canada as well. So we'll see how this all goes. Again, this could be part of the strategy. I don't know. But there is a lot of uneasiness, and with this uneasiness and the threat of tariffs and the impact on Vermont, it only leads to inflation. It's part of the same thing I've said in terms of property tax increases. It doesn't just affect everyday Vermonters, because there's a ripple effect. Because when you impact businesses, they have to pass on those costs to others, and this is no different, and will be passed on to consumers. So we'll pay it 2 or 3 times, and so that's and will increase inflation throughout our country, I believe.
So when Carrick was saying don't add to the uncertainty and the affordability problems, is he talking about let's not do the clean heat standard? I'm not sure exactly what he meant by that.
Well, thankfully he's on, and we can ask him.
Good question, Guy. What I was talking about is the governor and the administration has put on the table a proposal for how we can move forward on climate action and continue to make it affordable. For instance, and I'll just note in passing, Guy, I have remained in contact with Hydro-Quebec officials throughout. That's 1. 2, in terms of the broader financial plate tectonics in place, The province of Quebec, I know more about, makes incredible amounts of profit by the sale of electricity. So you wouldn't want to cut your nose to spite your face. We'll note that. But one aspect of what we're proposing, Guy, is to treat clean energy. Right now there's a renewable energy standard, and one of the factors we're proposing is make it a clean energy standard as opposed to more narrowly a renewable energy standard. Fundamentally what that means is eliminate the requirement that Vermont ratepayers have to pay for additional renewable energy certificates, purchase the attributes, additional attributes to round out new nuclear energy supplies. That is about 1.52 million a year, and that quickly adds up. So for instance, you can make a big dent in any energy tariff that might come down the pike with that one change alone. And interesting, Guy, I just had a conversation with my counterparts around New England this morning. I think 5 out of the 6 New England states are re-examining their nuclear kind of posture, what might make sense to pursue, because with the concurrent executive order with regards to slowing down offshore wind, where do we find low carbon energy supplies at scale that are cost effective? In the next 10 years or so is going to become an issue. With that, I'll stop, Governor.
You're saying clean heat credits for nuclear power? Did I hear that? Sorry.
Sorry, Guy, of all times, my monitor keeps going black, and so then I have to, so sorry about that. What was your question, please?
Did I hear you say clean heat credits for nuclear power?
It's renewable energy credits. Right now, you have to, in addition to pursuing or securing energy, you have to spend the money to purchase additional renewable energy certificates to round out the portfolio. What we're proposing is eliminate that expense.
Okay.
And just lastly, Guy, because I know you'll ask me, that constitutes about 18% of Vermont's current energy portfolio.
Thank you.
Back here in Montpelier, BAA should be heading to your desk or somewhere close to that process after the conference committee last week. Just wondering your thoughts on what came out of the conference committee and what you're potentially thinking about doing or not doing.
Yeah, again, it has one more step to go in the Senate. They ratified the conference committee. It's going to go to the House now, and they'll have to take an official vote on it. I expect that they will concur, but we'll see. We've made an effort to come up with a compromise on the hotel motel program, which they declined to do. But we're still hoping that they're going to be able to do something after it's vetoed, and then we'll get to a point where we agree to disagree, I guess. But I'm hopeful that we can still get something out of this, because again, there's 2 pieces of this, and we talked about this in another press conference, but the hotel motel program is one side, but the excess spending that I think it was 14 million that they spent over and above what we propose, and it's not necessary at this point in time. With all the uncertainty we're seeing, with tariffs, what's happening in DC, we don't know what programs are going to be cut in terms of funding and so forth. We should be saving every single penny we have and not spend it prematurely, because we may need that by the end of the session. So that's my message. Send me back a clean bill and let's move forward. We can have these discussions on everything else in the big bill.
One of the indivisible Vermont groups, I don't know if you're familiar with them, they're sort of community action groups that are pushing back on some of Trump's initiatives. I think sent you a letter today, maybe, I'm sure you haven't read it yet, but they're sending you a letter asking
I haven't opened the mail yet.
Yeah, you haven't opened the mail. They're asking you to have a 2-hour town hall to in person communicate directly with Vermonters, because they've expressed some sentiment that, unlike during the COVID era when you took a sort of a strong leadership role, that they don't sense that you're doing that now. You're taking more of a sort of wait and see, passive, stay under the radar role. I'm not saying I agree with that, I'm just saying that's what they've expressed in this letter. Do you have any interest in doing a town hall with Vermonters to discuss some of the
I think
stuff
it's-
we're talking about
again-
here every week?
Again, it's premature. We talk about it every single week. You report it every single week. I don't believe that it would serve any positive aspect. I just don't, there's nothing we can tell them more than we're telling you today. And I don't believe that creating more anxiety across the board, trying to answer questions that we have no answers to, wouldn't be in the best interest of Vermont at this point. If we come to a point where we understand exactly what's going to happen and it's happening, be happy to address Vermonters across the board. Maybe not in a town hall atmosphere, but we obviously are going to have to deal with it. And that comes down to the administration, the governor, and proposing a path forward from whatever the ramifications are of whatever they do, which is unknown at this point.
Can I ask a question again about tariffs?
Mhm.
I know we don't know if the tariffs will be paused about Canada, even though there's some indication that they may be, but do you have a sense that governors getting together and expressing to the administration that they have deep concerns about those tariffs and their impacts on their states has had a role in maybe the president considering a pause? And if so, can you restate whether you think you as a Republican governor have the ability to sort of collaborate with other governors and have some influence on federal policy?
I'm not sure that I have as good a standing as some of my Republican governor friends, but if they were to advocate for this, which I think that they may be behind the scenes, at least trying to be reasonable, would have a positive effect. Might change the dynamics a bit, and that goes for Congress as well. There are many Republicans who may not agree with the approach that's been taken because it might hurt their own states, agriculture and so forth. That could change the direction of the conversation. So I think they're having those conversations, maybe behind the scenes, but not in a public atmosphere.
I don't know, are we part of those conversations?
No.
Or have you tried to be part of those conversations, and if not, why not?
We have not at this point in time. Certainly, I mean, we talked about that when I was in Washington. The New England governors talked about all of this together. We had a meeting, so we're all on the same page. But that doesn't help again with the new administration. So the Northeast does not. We just don't have enough Republican governors to make a difference. So again, we'll have to wait and see, but we'll advocate our position when we know what it is and what they are actually going to do that would have an impact on Vermont.
All right, we're going to switch over to the phones now. It looks like we have Keith, Rutland Herald.
All mine have been asked and answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed Barber, Newport Daily Express.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm going to get back to education. We've seen some significant increases in education spending the last few years. It seems that a lot of that money went into adding more staff, increasing salaries and benefits. But what I haven't heard moving forward is addressing school construction spending, which could be in the hundreds of millions of dollars across the state for all the school buildings that need to be upgraded. Can you speak to that as to what plan that you have that goes hand in hand with the efforts you're making to change the structure of education in Vermont?
Well, I think we have to take one step at a time and reform the structural issues that we have within education first, then address when we know what we're dealing with, then address those other structural problems, school construction, for instance. But again, none of this will be possible unless we change, our demographics, have more homes and housing people can afford, bring more people into the state, drive more revenue into the state, because we learned about 15 years ago they were upside down. We were promising schools that we would participate in school construction when we didn't have the means to do so. We were, at that point, it sounded like a lot of money, but we were $100 million in debt at that point with promises that we couldn't keep, at least not in the short term. So that's why there was a moratorium placed on school construction. That hasn't relieved itself, but I, again, look forward to coming to a point where we have a more efficient educational system that might have more money available for school construction or maintenance and repairs that are desperately needed, and then consolidation that could be helpful when we're looking at how we consolidate schools and the construction needs associated with that.
One of the issues of consolidation in rural communities is the smaller schools, or we are anyway, they're pretty maxed out in terms of the student population. So any type of merging to happen would mean we would have to construct new schools, regional schools, and then we still have the expense of the existing facilities. Is this going to be on the table as well? And again, is there a timeline?
Secretary Saunders.
As the governor mentioned, we have to approach this in a phased way. We first need to really look at our overall system so that we can be strategic in how we make investments. The Agency of Education is providing some additional tools to support that work. We have a facilities dashboard that helps us to understand the conditions and some of the challenges with deferred maintenance for schools across the state. We've also done some additional analysis to evaluate the capacity utilization of our schools. And as we think about establishing the criteria for those schools that are small by necessity versus small by choice, those are some of the factors that need to come into play and be part of that criteria. So again, that we're being practical and we're maximizing the resources that we have available. But it is important that we take a phased approach to this. I think there's broad recognition that we don't have sufficient money to address all of the building needs, and that we need to be really thoughtful and strategic and planful around how those investments are made. And to do that, we first need to really organize our system in a way that's going to be able to optimize the resources that we're currently investing.
Thank you very much.
Tim McQuiston says his microphone's not working, and his question is what the governor knows about the sale of federal buildings and the impact of an already overstocked commercial real estate.
I don't know any more than he probably does in terms of, I've read the reports as well. The federal government has made mention that there may be more buildings for sale. That doesn't mean they're going to be sold, but it means they may be on the block, so to speak. And I think that we've taken advantage of some of those. I think recently in Burlington, some of the armories, National Guard armories, we put into play. So there is, there may be a use for them in the aftermath of this, but we'll have to wait and see what's actually real and, again, what's just talk.
All right, we'll go back to the room for a couple of final questions.
How many state employees are still working from home? Like roughly with the percentage? Is it up or down?
Up or down from when?
From, say, I don't know, 6 months or a year ago. Are more coming back, and roughly how many are?
I don't have the answer to that. I'd be happy to check with the Secretary of Administration and see if we can figure that out. But it's Secretary Clark's on here now.
Yeah, just to say that we can follow up with a more specific number and any trend information that we have.
Governor, 8 towns also passed a measure on town meeting day specifically calling on you to push back against federal overreach, as they put it. Do you have a response to that initiative or those ballot measures?
Well, I think we do that when we call them as we see them, and we'll continue to do that. I don't think I've been shy about pushing back against federal overreach, but again, it's hard to distinguish between rhetoric and reality. And so when it becomes real, and it's something that doesn't work for Vermont, we'll push back. If it's something that benefits Vermont, we'll be there at the table to help foster it along. And I'm sure that there'll be a bit of both in the coming years. But getting back, I understand people who aren't appreciative of President Trump, especially in Vermont, where he received 30% of the vote. But you know, we're in a democracy. He received the majority throughout the country, received the majority of electoral votes as well, and he's our president. And we have to respect that. I respect that, and we'll have to do whatever we can to work through these next 4 years. It's going to be difficult, I would imagine, but we'll see. Maybe something will surprise us, and it'll be of benefit to the state.
Just a final question for me. Obviously, President Trump addressed Congress this week, and one of our state representatives chose to sit out of that, Representative Palin. Do you have any response to the actions there, given the answer you just gave about us needing to respect President Trump?
Yeah, I think, again, when you're not at the table, you are at a disadvantage. So, and I'm not saying in this instance that it mattered whether our representatives were there in the building or not, but again, I've tried to be respectful. When I was in Washington, again, I went to with all the governors. As I said, I think last week, with the territories, there are 55 governors. And there were 48 that attended the National Governors Association meeting, which is almost a record. And we all went to the White House, both blue states and red states, and we're engaged with the cabinet, trying to understand where we could be effective, what we could help with, what they could be helpful to us with, and just having that level of decency, I think. Goes a long ways, and we're not adversaries. We may disagree, but we're not adversaries. We're still Americans.
Did you get any FaceTime with the president?
I did. Well, he addressed our group, as you saw, for quite a lengthy time. So that was about it for me.
Okay. You shook his hand, right? Did you speak to him at all
Yeah.
when you shook his hand?
No. Just he was walking by, and again, as a sign of respect, you shake the president's hand when he's walking by you.
Doug Burgum, have you been connecting with him at all?
I spoke to him a bit while I was there. Yeah, I was friendly with him when we were governors together.
All right.
Thank you all very much.